Welcome to our continuing series of Virtual Voices webinars. We are very appreciative of all your letters and comments and look forward to reading them. We are very pleased to welcome today Ms. Carole Wainaina, who was the former Assistant Secretary General of Human Resources at the United Nations and currently is the Chief Operating Officer of Africa 50. Our moderator is Apurv Gupta, who is on our executive board. Over to you, Apurv.
Dr. Durbach and Carole, it's a pleasure to have you joining us today at World Information Transfer's Virtual Voices series. Everyone joining from around the world, thank you for taking out the time and participating in today's session. As Dr. Durbach mentioned, we have Carole with us today, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Africa 50, also the Pan-Africa Infrastructure Investment Platform, capitalized by 28 African countries, the African Development Bank and the African Central Banks. She leads multidisciplinary teams, including investor relations and fundraising, strategy teams, communications, HR administration, as well as multiple ESG teams. Carole, it's an exciting pleasure to have you with us today. I myself work with Accenture within the sustainability practice, focusing heavily on financing for the SDGs. So personally, this is a very exciting topic, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, and really lovely to be able to connect with you. I'm currently in Nairobi, Kenya, so it's 7 p.m. at night, and the joys of Zoom is that we can all get together at any time in the 24-hour cycle with people around the world and have a conversation. So I hope this is going to be an exciting one. I'm going to start by introing myself a little bit because I would like to make this talk very personal. I don't know how many of you have been listening to Zoom webinars since the pandemic began. I certainly have done my fair share of them. And the best part about them is obviously we're getting a lot of content. And I think what might be a good complement to all the content that we're getting, obviously from experts, and there's a lot we can read from books, is perhaps a lot of personal context. Because that's some of the stories that we can't read in the books. And unless you get to meet someone live, you might not be able to get some of those. So allow me today to get a little personal. So as Christine said, the hat I currently wear is the Chief Operating Officer of Africa 50. Africa 50, as she said, is a pan-African investment platform for infrastructure. It's actually an African solution to an African challenge. I was whisked out or inspired out of the UN to help go start this organization because it completely addresses Goal 17. Africa has a huge infrastructure funding gap, and we all know that infrastructure is a big enabler for economic and social development. I'm sure many of you know there's still 650 million Africans without access to power, energy, electricity, the things you take for granted, charging your phone or even doing homework after it gets dark. And we also have 70% of the continent without access to internet. And you can imagine what that means, especially during times like this when everybody is doing online education. So infrastructure isn't just skyscrapers and bridges and funky roads. It truly is about the enabling infrastructure that connects communities and people for economic and social development. So the reason I went to Africa 50 is because African heads of state had come to the realization that the governments alone were never going to be able to fill the funding gap required to build the infrastructure required for the continent. And if they were going to do it drop by drop, like they were doing it, based on how much funding was available, that would take 100 years. So looking to other continents, it became clear that this had been done, for example, in Asia and Latin America, much more effectively by bringing in the private sector. So, of course, everybody expects the governments will do what they can to provide infrastructure for their citizens, But we also have people who are willing to make a return by investing in infrastructure, while at the same time making a contribution to people's economic and social development. And so this vehicle called Africa 50 was put together to attract the private sector to come in and partner with a vehicle that they could trust. Because of course, private sector doesn't like to partner with government. And if they do, it's always a fairly difficult partnership because, you know, the different organizations or entities come with different agendas, different rules and regulations, different expectations, and often find it difficult to play together. Although I must say, it's getting better around the world. But, you know, we all know that public-private partnerships, although they have become something we all recognize is vital, are still very difficult to work with and implement with speed. So one of the exciting things about Africa 50 is that we kind of hardwired in the partnership. So rather than getting people to come to the table with their various interests, we say, why don't we create an organization that has all the elements of public and private? So Africa 50 is in fact a development finance institution, is a hybrid between a development finance institution and a private equity fund. So it's a bit of an experiment because that hasn't been done before. And we are probably the only organization in Africa where governments give us money, but they don't tell us how to spend it. So if you're a private equity fund, you receive money from investors and you invest it for a return. And so that's what we've made our governments do. So they've capitalized Africa 50. And then based on the fact that we are now able to make investments in the continent, we can attract private sector investors as well. And we run with the governance of a private fund, in which case they can trust us to invest their money well. But most importantly, we have another objective, which is to also have an impact on the continent with regard to economic and social development, which means whoever's investing in us is not just making a financial return, they are making a social return by influencing. So the governments give us money, they don't tell us how to spend it, and the organization's going really well. So I was challenged to build the organization from scratch. So I have been responsible for hiring every single person and selecting the office, putting in every policy, every system. But I wanted to bridge that to what I want to call my personal SDG journey, because in the end, that's what we will all have to tell, I believe, at the end of our lives is, how did we individually contribute to the SDGs? Because this is a challenge for everybody, and certainly an opportunity that everybody can contribute to. I would say it's our license to live in the world. So prior to going to Africa 50, as I said, I was Assistant Secretary General for Human Resources at the UN. One of the best parts about that, being there at that time, was it was when the UN was turning 70, and it was when the SDGs were actually negotiated and signed. And I was actually in the room during the United Nations General Assembly when all the heads of states stood up and signed to leave no one behind. So it was goosebump material when you know, President Obama was in the room, President Xi was in the room, even President Putin was in the room. And I just wanted to say that because at that moment, as an African girl who had grown up in a small town from a low middle class family, sitting in that General Assembly hall, listening to all of those leaders committing to leave no one behind, what I have to say was a moment of huge inspiration and huge hope. I'm not sure I feel like that at the moment, but I wanted to share how I felt in that moment, because everybody who could possibly make a difference and had the power to make a difference was in the room and was committing to do something that the 17 goals collectively would ensure that we left no one behind. So, I mean, fast forward, I think everything that I have done, and I'm pretty sure if every one of us go back to what we do every day, we can attach our actions to a goal that we're contributing to. So I just wanted to bridge to two other companies that I work for. So prior to coming to the UN, I worked at an organization called Phillips, whose mission is to make the world healthier and more sustainable through innovation. And of course, so, you know, SDG 3, good health and well-being. And over the years, Phillips has become actually very, very committed to the circular economy, responsible consumption and production, and obviously contributing towards climate change. I think what's fascinating about what's happened, particularly in the private sector, is how every single one can talk about what they do in terms of making a financial return, but also how they contribute to at least one or more of the SDGs. And if companies can do that, then we certainly as individuals can do that, both in terms of the organizations we work for, but also in our personal lives. And I will share an insight on that a little bit later. And then prior to Phillips, I worked at the Coca-Cola company, which I'm sure that may give people mixed views about, well, do they really contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals, or are they just contributing to making the world slightly more obese? So, you know, the company gets a lot of flack in addition to perhaps the good they do in the world. My Coca-Cola story, so I worked at that company for 13 years. Growing up in Kenya, as a girl in a small town, I had a soft drink made by the Coca-Cola company on 2 occasions, my birthday and Christmas. So it was a very special company. And when I finally got to work for the Coca-Cola company, I mean, my parents were so proud of me, because it was like working for Moët Chandon. It was like, you know, the place where we make champagne, because the Coke at Christmas was like our champagne today, because that's what we could afford and that's what we had for special occasions. But more importantly, I saw a global company that came and created a local value chain where everybody made money. So there was the company that I worked for that basically made and sold concentrate. And then we had the local companies that, you know, mixed it, the bottlers, bottled it and distributed it. Then there was a small, you know, trader somewhere who probably was either a retailer or had one of these containers that the ships have that they would use to distribute to small kiosks. Then there was probably a woman that ran a kiosk. And then there could be another, you know, woman who stood at the side of the street with her tray and was selling soft drinks. And even to the last mile where the trucks couldn't go, there probably was a man with his donkey who could put 2 crates on the back of his donkey and get the soft drink up the hill. And that's how they made a living. And that's SDG 1, because it's creating livelihoods. And so there are many, many different ways to look at how we contribute to the world. And for me, that was a really, really special company to work for, and to see how they contributed to basically creating employment, creating joy, and creating livelihoods. And at some point we had measured that for one person employed by the Coca-Cola company, the impact on other people was 10 to 15 people whose lives would be impacted. I myself invested in 4 angel businesses out of my my salary that came from the Coca-Cola company. So 4 little entrepreneurial businesses that women who needed capital could have. So I've always seen that wherever I am, even if I'm working for a big organization, there is a way for every company to contribute to making the world a better place. Now, I have to agree that many do that better than others, but I tell the story to show the opportunity, and it'll help get to my last point, which is where I'm going to get to about why this SDG journey is important to us as individuals. So, and then prior to the Coca-Cola company, I worked for the Kenya Wildlife Service, where I was working with wildlife conservation, conserving the wildlife in Kenya. At the time, wildlife was Kenya's biggest foreign exchange earner. And I was involved in the transformation of the wildlife sector and making sure that we conserve our wildlife, which is, of course, part of making sure we had preserved our wildlife for future generations, but also that it was a huge asset that was able to bring in financial return to my country. So I've had the honor, privilege, and blessing to work in many sectors, in many countries, in many industries, with many leaders across the world. But I'm not an expert in any of those businesses. So what is it I did, and what did I learn? So as a young person, like many young people, I wanted to change the world. I wanted to see the world, and I wanted to change the world. And I think what we always wonder is, how can we change the world from where we are if we have so little? And for a long time, like many people, I would think that that's for the government, or that's for people with money, or that's for the United Nations, or World Hunger. Well, that must be for the Food and Agriculture Organization and the World Food Program. So I think from where we sit, sometimes we think that the problem's too big for us. That's a mother issue. And how am I going to be able, from my small place, be able to contribute? Now, it is true that the Sustainable Development Goals have given us this common framework, so that whatever it is we do, if the ocean is made of little drops, whatever drop we drop in the ocean, we can say it's in this bucket, or it's in this bucket, or it's in this bucket. And hopefully then collectively, we're all contributing to changing the world. But through my experiences, it became clear to me that the biggest limitation to changing the world was the behavior of human beings. And we are trying to change the world. And when we are focused on changing the world way more than we are focused on changing ourselves. And so as I worked in big organizations and looked at the decisions that leaders were making, and the impact that they could make, and what was optimizing that impact, it became clear to me that it was not, we needed to change behaviors. And that I also understood that to change behaviors, you needed to understand what was driving those behaviors. And beneath everybody's behavior, there are mindsets and beliefs, there are feelings and emotions, and there are needs and fears. But these are the things we don't talk about in workplaces, communities, government meetings. We talk about the content, as I said, and we don't talk very much about the content and what's driving some of the behaviors that we don't like to see in the world, or get in the way of us changing the world. And so I wanted to give an example of one organization where it became clear that if we were going to change the company, in order to fulfill the change we wanted to see in the world, create a healthier world, and we wanted to transform the company into the kind of company that would do that, we needed to start by changing ourselves. Fortunately, I worked with a leader right at the top of the organization who understood that this company was going to be changed one person at a time. And so we started with the top team, the CEO and the 10 people, and we started to do our work that said, what are the things that get in the way of us being the most impactful leaders we can be today? And we actually did the hard work of getting underneath, including the CEO, what are our mindsets and beliefs? What are our needs and fears? And once we realized, and I'm not going to describe the whole process because but it works. Once we realized that we all had barriers that were getting in the way of us being able to contribute effectively to something we so believed in and wanted to accomplish, we started to do our inner work. We then started to do the same work with our teams, and those leaders started to do the same work with their teams. So by the time I left, we had done 1,500 leaders, and then those 1,500 leaders at the top of the organization started to work with the other leaders in the organization. That organization has had one of the most successful organizational transformations that has happened. And I do believe a big contributor to that was that individuals went back to understand what was stopping them from contributing to making this a better place. And what we often do is we say it's the structure, so we change the structure. It's the processes, we change the processes. It's the systems. That's kind of change 1.0. And what we don't look at is, why don't people have agency? Why is everyone behaving like a victim here? Why are we all pointing fingers? You know, what are the things that are holding us back? And why are these what we call below the line behaviors so prevalent in this organizational culture? And so I had the insight that if we could do this in an organization, of course, it's kind of a contained, institution, so to speak. And of course, it has a profit goal. So if you can say that if we do this, we will accomplish this, and then we will also make a difference in the world, there's a lot more incentive to go and get people to change. So what would we need to do in non-profit organizations where actually people come in every day to make a difference in the world? And, you know, would that be possible, for example, at the United Nations, where I'm sure everybody walks in the door with good intentions, but we don't always accomplish the objectives that we want to accomplish. So I am persuaded. So I saw the impact in that company, and I have then, since then, started to do work with small teams and communities that are trying to accomplish greater good. And saying, before, you all know what you want to do from a content perspective. How can I help the leaders do their inner workout so that we can make sure that whatever it is we want to accomplish, it does happen, because the politics doesn't get in the way, the egos don't get in the way, we don't start undermining each other, we don't bring the competition inside when we're trying to make an impact on the outside. So I am persuaded that if we want to accelerate the SDGs, we have to do more inner workout. And we have to find people in organizations who are willing to do the work, facilitate the work, and hold the space, because it is hard work. I think part of the reason I get given credibility to work with leaders with this work is because I can speak their language first, and I can still take them to the inner workout. And I am persuaded that this is how we need to change the world. So I continue to do my own work. And, you know, you can ask me questions about what that looks like if you want. And I continue to work with leaders, particularly leaders, because a CEO or a president or the head of any unit is the highest leverage change person in that organization. If they are conscious, you know, they can, you know, leverage the collective best thinking of that organization. They can empower people to bring their best self to work. They can ensure that the competition isn't inside, it's outside where it needs to be, if that's where it needs to be. And so the things that trigger us and drives the kind of behavior that gets in the way can be minimized. And, you know, so I have come to focus on goal 17 as kind of my main goal, even though I have worked and continue to work with many of the others. But I think we all believe that we're not going to change the world without the partnerships, particularly the complementary partnerships, where we all bring the best thinking to the table, or the best capability, skills, and experience, but it's going to come from different sectors, different people, different organizations. And it's the complementarity and the ability to work together that actually makes this successful going forward. But if you bring individuals and human beings to those partnerships who also are a little unconscious, you still get those ego dynamics playing out in the organizations as well. So as uncool as this work is, I think it's becoming cooler, or as we don't spend a lot of time doing it in the organizations that we work for. I'm persuaded we need to do more of that going forward. And we need people who step out and say, you know, if we're really serious about what we want to accomplish, and we have a strong sense of common purpose, this will enable us. And then, of course, once we have a few proofs of concept, and then we have, particularly now that young leaders are starting to take over in many spheres of the world, whether that be politics, business, or nonprofit. We need advocates for this work, because I truly think it's going to be the accelerators. When you have conscious leaders, the processes don't undermine them. The systems don't undermine them. They can make different decisions because they are coming from a heart-centered place. They're coming from a place of being truly human. So we have an African saying, if there is no enemy within, the enemies outside cannot harm you. We're in the middle of a huge pandemic. This pandemic doesn't know any borders. We have never been more reminded of the fact that we're all part of the human race. And we need to think about how we are truly human, and for one human to see another human and be able to put aside all the things that get in the way, we need to do some of our inner work. And we've been given the opportunity in this pandemic to go back home, to go on time out, to think about what we have done and think about what we're going to do differently, and take time to do our inner work. So I think if we want to contribute uniquely and individually to the SDGs, we need to start by doing our inner work and changing ourselves. And it's not just an action thing. It truly is about, reflecting and really looking for the answers inside of you. And you normally don't hear business people talking about this stuff, but this is the stuff we now need to be talking about if we want to change the world. So I'll stop there and I'll take your questions.
Well, first, Carole, your idea of personal SDG journey is just excellent. And your energy and dedication, I wish that it could be bottled and spread all over the world. It is absolutely effusive. You're absolutely right. Most of the things that are stopping us are the fears and the emotions. And personally, I have a company called Executive Stress Management, and that's what I do. I work with executives to change the company. So I have seen it on many levels. But if you can just help with that, particularly at the United Nations, so that the people stop using their fears and their concerns and their emotions and their behaviors to stop any progress, that will be terrific. So I just want to congratulate you. It sounded absolutely wonderful. Apurv?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Durbach and Carole. That was an absolute delight to hear. You took all of us through a journey of understanding the investment landscape in Africa, to understanding SDGs on a more personal level, and also helping understand what organizations now need next to accelerate that journey. As Dr. Durbach knows as well, as I was an intern previously at World Information Transfer, I've always focused on financing the SDGs. And that's something that I do now as well in my formal job at Accenture with the UN Global Compact. One of the things that has always come up in sort of all of the work that we've done previously in understanding the financing landscape is how to balance trade-offs. And I think that's something that companies have always had a difficulty in understanding. How can they sort of effectively build up the impact that their company can have while also retaining profits? And somewhere, whether it's the leadership, whether it's the mid-management, there's always that kind of trade-off mindset that people have within organizations, that if they're investing in sustainability, they're essentially losing money, or at least not tapping in value on the table. What is your perspective, and what have you heard that might be that is showing that these kind of mindsets and attitudes are changing across companies in understanding sustainability as a profit driver or as a driver of competitiveness?
Yeah. I think the first thing is, I said that one of the things that drives behavior is mindsets and beliefs. If you have a belief that these things are mutually exclusive, then we always have, a version of trade-offs. If we're doing a lot of this, we're missing a lot of that, and if we're doing a lot of this, and this black and white thinking, I think, is what has led us to some of the challenges that we have today. I think going forward, we all have to get comfortable with a lot more gray. And sometimes it's a time and place issue. So we're trading off time. We're not trading off, something else. And sometimes it's taking a long-term view. And sometimes it's genuinely deciding, and as we have had to do with the pandemic, are we going to save people's lives, or are we going to let businesses and the economy suffer? So I think the license to be alive is that you have to make these trade-offs, because you cannot control everything that happens in the world. You can only control your response and your reaction to it. But the trade-offs are real. And the reason why I go back to the fact that consciousness is really, truly the most important, or one of the biggest contributors, is because it allows you to hold that gray, and it helps you make a decision from a head and a heart combined place, rather than just a head space. And I completely understand that organizations and corporations were made to deliver a profit. The way I think about life is it's a fair exchange of energy. Money is neutral. Money is an energy. And whatever we're doing in the world, we need to make sure we have a fair exchange of energy. And so, and money is not a bad thing. So we don't have the do-gooders who are not making money but are saving the world, and the baddies who are making money and then giving it to the good people to go and save the world. Like if we all made enough money and we all had a healthy livelihood and we weren't greedy, I think we would all in our sphere of influence be able to make an impact. But as long as we have a world where there are people who make money, whether they be big corporations, and therefore need to continue to make more of it, so that the others can get some and be able to save the world, I think we'll always have these dichotomies. So we haven't got it right yet, but you can see the trend. So the whole social impact and impact investing industry has come out of an understanding that business that is just solely profit oriented is not going to be sustainable. And we just need to see what's happening now to know, well, that's all well and good if you'd made your profits, but hey, look what happened. And so we are so interdependent. And in the African tradition, we talk about community. Community is about interdependence. I win, you win. I lose, you lose. So if we can understand just how interdependent our ecosystem is, then those trade-offs, I think, become slightly less difficult to make. But you need a leader who's prepared to have the courage to say, less profits now for sustainability. I think you all remember the story of Paul Pullman when he went into Unilever. And of course, in those days, if you were a publicly quoted company, you had to quote report your quarterly profits. And if you didn't, your stock price went down. And he just went in and said to his shareholders, I'm not going to do quarterly reporting. I mean, that's a conscious leader. He had the courage to say, I need time to figure out what this business is for the long term. And he was able to do that. But, I'm sure there are others who think, well, I can't face my board, or I can't face my shareholders. And so where does that courage come from? Courage is a heart thing. And so heartfelt leaders will think about the trade-offs and make that difficult, courageous decision to go and challenge with shareholders or the board or whoever to try and make the trade-offs. So, which is why I come back to, if we were to go back to what is the core thing we need to change, rather than throwing the problem out there and giving some action-oriented formulas, if this, then that. I think if you truly were a conscious leader in that moment, you would listen to yourself, you would make the right balanced decisions, and you would take some chances that were focused on achieving the right objectives. We need more of those leaders. So life is about trade-offs. And my own career has been hugely successful, but I've had to make some trade-offs that That's just the journey of life.
I completely agree, and I resonate everything that you're saying. I think leadership behaviors are definitely changing, and they're changing at a very accelerating rate, at least since the SDGs were launched, because the level of expectation that is coming is very real. And that position is no longer an administrative role to manage a company. It is very much to understand not only about how you're making your products, but what products you're even making to begin with. So those sort of nuances and those questions are changing all the time. And I can see the level of pressure that's coming from people like you, from organizations like World Information Transfer, but also from employees internally. You know, as a young person myself, I expect certain behaviors, my leadership in my company to adopt, for me to continuously be motivated to work for it. Do you think in your work, working with CEOs on a daily basis, specifically regarding infrastructure investment programs in Africa, do you understand that they're beginning to understand those expectations from them? And can they pinpoint to the specific kind of behaviors they need to change? Dr. Durbach mentioned previously that she helps executives understand how they cannot bring their own fears and anxieties into the workplace. But have they begun to understand this for themselves?
I think the honest answer is no, not at the scale that you would want to see an accelerated change. But that shouldn't discourage us. So the way I think about changing the world is you can't change people. All you can do is create an environment where people want to change themselves. And then if they change, then they change the places that they have that are under their supervision. So what I see as an opportunity is, if we all leave our humanity behind when we go in to have these discussions, whether it's about investments or about whatever it is, then we never have an opportunity to demonstrate with our own behaviors that there is another way to look at things. And so this is what it's about, is when I find another like-minded person, we encourage each other to have those conversations shall I say, in the right places, but what were previously considered the wrong places. So yes, I do go in to, discuss with an African president that, we're looking at doing an infrastructure investment. But the first thing you do is appeal to his humanity. So ask him about his children. That will sink him immediately from his head to his heart. And then you start to have the rest of the conversation, and then you find opportunities to lead that on. So my point is, I think if we again do one of these external interventions like we do with everything, that's not going to work. It's truly about I do my work so I can be the best person I am in every room that I can be. And I hope that in my own small way, I can appeal to somebody's heart, because the highest contribution to changing the world is changing myself. And then the more of us are in these discussions, the more change we're going to see. I don't think and then sometimes what happens is, if you get a leader like me, or of course, I'm not the only one, there are many and I can name them, then they work with teams. And, I would say there are a few presidents I can see who have an increased level of consciousness. And you can definitely see that the conversations they're having in their ministries or in their parliaments are slightly different. They have perhaps like more women, and they're making, slightly different decisions. So it's going to be a slow burn until we have a critical mass. What is the biggest lever is having a conscious leader at the top, because then it starts from there. And I'm an idealist, so I want to see a world where once we start to see more of those in different places, we will definitely have the impact, or the accelerated impact that we want in terms of making the decisions that need to be made. But my real appeal is about, we're listening and talking about African leaders. but what have we done, individually in terms of our own inner work? So before we can even start to say what's needed in the world, your SDG journey starts with you doing your inner workout. And if that's all you ever do, that is your highest contribution to the world. Because if you show up in places, things will happen that wouldn't typically have happened. And I believe that is true. We are too focused on being human doings. And so we're looking for actions and activity. And then we have all these measurement and reporting. And all of that is important because we live in a world that needs to be able to see that we're making progress. But I guess I'm advocating for the valuable intangibles that are the oxygen that fuels the things we're trying to do, so that even when we are reporting and monitoring them, we are seeing greater progress. And because it's a little bit intangible, it's not everything that counts can be counted. I don't think we have as big a focus in the world on these items. And so if leaders like me who can still speak the business are able to, start conversations in boardrooms and in presidents' meetings about consciousness and doing our inner work and being heart-centered and thinking about the things that are getting in the way, I think that's important. And it does take some courage because in lots of times people will roll their eyes and sometimes it won't work, but that doesn't stop me from continuing to do it and building a community of people who have the courage to do it too.
Well, that really is just amazingly complicated on the one hand and very, how should I say, stimulating to consider it from the perspective that unfortunately we have a society that basically is built on narcissism, and people are more concerned about whether they have money to buy the next thing rather than what should be done in order to be able to achieve some of the elementary goals that we need to save the planet. I just, as I said, I wish I could bottle your energy and distribute it to all the people that I work with, because I think that would be a very, very wonderful, easy solution that could bring in a tremendous amount of satisfaction to a lot of people that just feel very desperate about the fact that they cannot affect any changes, particularly with some governments. And I'm sure I do not need to mention who I think of.
Yeah, as I said, I'm an idealist, and obviously on my bad days, I look at the state of the world, I look at the leaders in the world, and I just want to give myself a reality check. But then again, I say, I'm a mother of 2 young children. I hope that they will have children. And if I just allow the narcissists to continue doing what they're doing, then, and feel like there is nothing I can do about it, then I don't have the license to keep living in the world. And so, so the reason I encourage people to do their inner work, because it's kind of like this thing that is the magic that might work somewhere that you don't know about. And it's something you definitely have control over, even if you can't do anything about the narcissist who runs your country. And I genuinely believe we are in a bit of an inflection point as a world. Sometimes the only way for some of the leaders we have to change is that things will collapse or something huge will happen, and change can come that way. And we don't have to necessarily participate in that. If it happens, it happens. But agency is about taking ownership for the piece that I can contribute to. So what I was hoping to trigger with the conversation is just our own internal contribution to a world that looks desperately hopeless at times. and hope that if we can become those people and raise those people, that we can have a generation, even if it's not in our lifetime, that is going to be a leader who is conscious, and therefore we will have contributed to changing the world. So I say I'm an idealist, but I have seen in little pockets what a difference that makes. And I hope that we can have more people who have the courage to not just do, but be. And the being is we are human beings. If we are heart-centered and listen to ourselves and we're inner directed about some of the decisions we make. In a small way, imagine if 1 million people were doing that, then 2 million, 3 million, the narcissists will somehow be in a different world. But I know it looks impossible from where we sit. So I try to bring my little bit of optimism everywhere. And because I practice it in small circles, we're not going to boil the ocean, but if we can take a little pool and see that it's boiling, we get hope that if we connect more pools, one day the ocean will boil. And that's how I feel about this work. So I have come to believe that our biggest contribution as individuals is to change ourselves. And I know that the be the change that Gandhi said has been touted around, but sometimes people think about being the change as doing something. But if you're doing something which is action and behavior from a place that isn't centered and grounded and where, still is driven by needs and fears and different actions, it's still not going to be the right behavior. So, I hope the world can go back inside while we go through this pandemic and come out of this with perhaps a slightly different way to do our thing in our patch, and slowly by slowly the narcissistic leaders will be taken care of. I mean, I have a small example, and I think that one of the reasons why, and this could be controversial, so pardon me, one of the reasons why the world was so taken by the death of George Floyd and what happened there was because for the first time, we were all at home. We were all experiencing something together that didn't have boundaries or color or gender. So we were connected to our common humanity. And so we saw something. And maybe for the first time in a long time, many people saw just something happen to another human being. So from one human to another human, there was a huge outcry because this is not the first time something like that had happened. So what was different this time? And that's what consciousness is, that in that moment, we saw it from a different place. And maybe if that had happened 3 months earlier, we would not have had the same reaction. So the more we can connect to that common humanity, because if you go down, we're all the same. That as difficult as it was, gives me hope that we got touched with our common humanity, so therefore we recognize that it is there, and hopefully we don't go back to creating the barriers. So I think those are some of the things that are giving me hope, especially in these times of the pandemic, that this situation has gifts and challenges, but mostly I hope it connects us to our common humanity. It increases our consciousness, and it challenges us as individuals to be better people and go do our inner work.
So I guess the more interesting question is, how do we collectively engineer this kind of conscience for other kinds of issues like climate change or population, where we're continuously touting the carrying capacity of this world? What might be some quick wins, some medium-term solutions, and what is the transformational change that we ultimately need from humanity to put an end to some of these social and environmental issues?
Yeah, so I think, so as I said, obviously, you start where you are And I was going to say, do what you can, but actually start where you are by being the best person you can be in that situation. So one of the things I say is, if everybody had a practice to really go inside and be silent and be present in the world, rather than the distracted world we live in, where we know we all have issues and problems. I know Christine would agree with me, but we then distract ourselves. And the first thing is, what can I do? I can stop distracting myself because I'm faced with having to see all these issues in the world, and be silent. And my practice is meditation and prayer, but a lot of people have different, and journaling, but a lot of people have different practices that help them. And I am persuaded that if more and more people did that for a start, whatever issue or cause or SDG they pick to influence, that could be influenced. Then the second thing is, then you look in your next sphere of influence, whatever that might be, your family. What is it you can do within your family in terms of contributing to making that a better unit and making sure there is no conflict. I mean, people come from hugely conflicted families to go and solve the conflict in the world. We leave our humanity at home to go and fix the other humanity somewhere else in the world. So I'm a big believer in, I start with myself, and then I go to my family, and then I go to my community, and of course in the organizations where I work. There have been some models, and we probably won't have time to talk about them, that there is a gentleman called David Gershon who's written a book called Change 2.0. And his idea was kind of a bottom-up change. So very similar, to start with yourself and then find a way to contribute. Once you have agency, with other people who have agency, and don't look up to just the people that we have assigned the responsibility and power to change our lives, because clearly they haven't always been able to do that. And the archaic systems, I guess, are not fit for purpose today as well. And there are a number of projects, you can read about them, but one of them is a project in California called Cool Blocks. And Cool Blocks is a climate change initiative, which you may have heard of, where basically neighbors got together and agreed how they were going to, just as their block, be more environmentally conscious, because they realized that consumption was the biggest driver to climate change. And so it started off by, they train how they are going to, do my inner work. How am I going to approach my neighbors to form this cell? How are we going to collectively decide to do that? And then Cool Blocks becomes another Cool Block and another Cool Block. It's actually really fascinating. And whatever you think of it, that the principle of being able to convince your neighbors, even if 6 out of 10 say yes and 4 say no, they started with the 6, and before long, 2 who had been left out ended up joining. And now it's become a full California project, which the governor is going to sponsor. And so we always think that, this is climate change. It's a big issue. Somebody else should be dealing with it, not me. So again, I say, start with you, do what you can in your family, and take some responsibility. I know it's difficult. I work with people who say, Carole, you don't understand my family, or Carole, you don't understand my organization. There's always going to be a barrier. That's the world we live in. So your challenge is just to take ownership and influence where you have your sphere of influence. And then beyond that, then do what you can do. But if we don't even do that, because the connection of all of those little bits that we all do are a contribution, but if we're waiting for someone, that drop that we could have put ourselves is missing in the whole. And that's the drop that I wanted to encourage you to put in today.
Well, it's a very inspirational presentation. I definitely think that if our audience has been listening carefully, they've put a lot of notes down, and maybe all of them will decide to pick on one SDG that they can have some influence on. Because basically, I know personally, I do that. I focus on health and environment, and it's based on my history and on my experiences, which I think can contribute to everybody in the world. But you are absolutely right. It is very, very difficult to get people to listen to anything that would take away from their own perspective because of the fear that they have in moving away from their own little shelf. And that is very, very difficult to do. So I'm glad that you found it. And I still say that I wish I could borrow that energy and send it to everybody with a note, get your own SDG and follow it. So thank you very, very much for your presentation.
Exactly.
It was just wonderful. And thank you very much for taking the time of coming and being with us.
My pleasure.
Said it best, Dr. Durbach. I mean, this has been a very, very fascinating presentation to listen to, Carole. I love the idea of personalizing the SDGs and not just always looking at it from a global, very macro forest view, but rather focus on individual actions and then have them trickle down at the community level. And the next thing you know, your small action has magnified to the entire work. I'm grateful for you to come on our Virtual Voices series, have our audience listen to this fabulous presentation. I can assure you this is a network that World Information Transfer has in terms of professionals across the world who have now heard your story, who have now hopefully will be picking out their SDGs and making small actions and changes in their lives and their communities. So very much thank you for that, for giving that to our audience, and it was a pleasure listening to you.
Thank you all. Stay safe and go do your thing in the world. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carole. Excellent.